Welcome back to Tales of Knights and Magic. Subscribe if you like, and now get comfortable, and enjoy this glimpse into the world of fantasy. A chill wind whipped along the precipice of Falcon's crest, as dawn's pale light slipped over the jagged towers. Below, the free-soaring hawks drifted on thermals rising from craggy bluffs, their cries echoing like ancient battle trumpets. In one of the stonework aviaries, Caden Vale fastened the straps of his light leather satchel and slipped the small brass spyglass into its pocket. Each breath tasted of sea salt and promise. Today he would set out to recover the Falcon's bounty grimoire. Legendary texts said to grant mastery of flight magic itself, and at last leave the confines of dusty libraries for the wider world. He paused at the edge of the stone walkway to watch Ronan, the sky hunter, release a newly trained kestrel. Ronan's rough laughter carried on the wind as the bird wheeled over the battlements, talons outstretched for a piece of the floating meat. Ronan scabbed. Caden admired the hunter's certainty. The hawk's instincts were unerring, guided by Ronan's whispered commands. If any man could spot a hidden temple ruin from a mile away, it was Ronan. The knight cleared his throat and caught the fowler's eye. "Ronan," he called, voice barely rising above the wind. The hunter spun, cloak flaring like a dark wing. Caden swallowed. "I've brought the runic compass you asked for. We leave at first light." Ronan hopped down from the aviary rail, cloak billowing. His jagged grin revealed the beginnings of a scar that ran from cheek to chin. "Thought you'd never ask," he rumbled, slapping Caden on the shoulder with enough force to jostle the compass in Caden's pack. "That old thing better guide us true, or you'll be the first to taste my smoking dagger." Caden laughed, the tension easing. "It's charged with moonwater and dragonbone dust, more than enough to pierce any ward the ruins can muster." He shouldered his satchel and stepped back from the cliff's edge. "Come on. The Cress's winds favor us today." They strode through the narrow cobbled streets as the city came alive. Merchants unlatched shutters, spilling crates of salted fish and bundles of windroot from wagons. Town criers heralded the day's sky races, and children chased each other with wooden crossbows. At the north gate, Caden and Ronan found Mara of the Marsh, waiting by a battered caravan cart. Her dark hair was pulled back to reveal bright, curious eyes. Around her sat clusters of glowing emberflies she coaxed from glass jars into a woven basket. "Mara, you mad woman," Caden greeted. "You sure these ember flies won't burn us all alive before we reach Duskwild?" Mara smiled serenely. "Only if you upset them. They light the path in the ember deep, and scare off marsh lurkers far worse than fire." She hefted her satchel of poultices. "Also, I brought root salve for Ronan's kestrel. Know how you foul folks worry about a scraped wing." Ronan laughed, tossing a small coin to the herbalist. "Your cures are worth gold. Lead on, flame child." Their final ally, Tab the Blade Singer, emerged from a nearby tavern doorway as they passed. Tab's sword hung at his hip, etched with silver runes that pulsed faintly in the early light. His stoic expression cracked briefly when he saw Caden. "We expecting company at Duskwild?" he asked, voice low as they fell into step. Caden glanced at him, a thread of worry beneath his excitement. "If the lore is right, Lyra the Tome Keeper will meet us there. She has the next clue on the grimoire's location." He sighed, feeling the weight of all they'd embarked upon. "We need her guidance more than ever. Moonwater runs low, and the marshes hold secrets best left alone." Tab nodded, sheathing his blade with a metallic click. "Let's hope she's more cooperative than last time." By midday they reached the edge of the city's farmland, where neat fields of barley gave way to wind-gnarled oaks and whispering grasses. The road narrowed to a knee-deep trail through the Duskwild forest, where every shadow seemed to flicker with hidden light. Caden's heart thumped at the sight of the dusky tree trunks. This was the place of living shadows, the very heart of old magic. As they entered the gloom, Mara released the emberflies, their warm glow dancing ahead like tiny lanterns. They crossed through pools of phosphorescent fungus and weaved past sentinel ferns that brushed against Caden's cloak. At one fork Ronan paused. "This way," he murmured, checking the runic compass. Its needle quivered like a thirsty worm seeking water. The path sloped downward toward an ancient stone arch half buried in moss. Faded runes ran along its lintel, and the air hummed with quiet power. Caden approached, spreading his hands to feel the rune's energy. "True. Moonwater," he whispered, recalling the archivist's warning that the arch marked the entrance to the ruins beneath ember-deep marshes. "The grimoire's first shard is hidden just inside." He turned to his companions. "Be ready. The texts say the entrance is protected by living dreams. Nothing physical can break it." Caden crossed his arms. "Then we break it with magic." "Yen," Caden shook his head, heart racing. "No, we break it with understanding. We trick the ward, not battle it." The others exchanged skeptical glances, but Mara gave Caden a steady look. "Your head's full of books, Vale. Let's see if it holds up." For a long moment, they stood before the arch, the emberfly's light pulsing like watchful eye. Caden closed his own eyes and whispered the first incantation carved on the runes. A phrase of invitation. The air shimmered, the stone quavered, leaves rustled without wind. Then, with a grinding groan, the arch's threshold slid open to reveal a dark passage, its walls slick with seepage and faint blue veins glowing like dying lightning. A hush fell. Caden grabbed the spyglass, gazing down the tunnel as if seeing centuries of secrets swirl in its depth. This is it, he breathed. The memory sanctum of the grimoire's first page. Ronan hefted his hawk onto his gauntlet. Lead on, cartographer, the sky hunter teased, voice echoing oddly in the twilight. Or should I say, grimoire finder. Caden allowed himself a grin, despite the knot of nerves in his gut. This was the first step on a journey that would test every lesson he'd ever learned, and forge him into a true merchant of magic between the realms of sky, shadow, and ancient power. With a resolute nod, he stepped into the archway, followed by his motley band, hearts alight with both fear and hope. The path ahead was steep, and the world beyond held wonders and terrors in equal measure. But for Caden Dale, there was no turning back now. Caden's boots echoed hollowly on the slick stone floor as he stepped beneath the ancient archway, bowing his head to let the emberfly's glow trace the outline of the tunnel walls. Behind him, Ronan's kestrel settled on his gauntlet, talons clinking against the steel. Mara and Tav flanked him, torchlight flickering across their determined faces. The air smelled of damp moss and something far older, an undercurrent of arcane residue that made Caden's skin prickle with anticipation. Well, Tav murmured, voice low, so only Caden could hear. This place could swallow a caravan whole and spit out bones. He tapped the runes on the hilt of his sword. Good thing you came prepared with moonwater and cunning, not muscle. Caden exhaled, letting his nerves settle. We'll need both. Keep your eyes sharp. He held up the spyglass. Through its brass lenses he spotted faint inscriptions carved into the walls. Tiny sigils arranged like constellations, glowing with a ghostly blue light. Each set of runes corresponds to a phrase in the grimoire. We recite them in order, and the passage will open fully. Mara knelt beside the nearest sigil, rummaging in her satchel for a silver-tipped quill. Here, she said, drawing luminescent ink from a vial. I'll mark our path so we don't loop ourselves into madness. As Caden traced his finger along the first rune, he murmured the incantation he'd gleaned from Meslyra's manuscripts. Wings of air and breath of cloud, let passage form through mist unbowed. At once the sigil blazed with white light. A low rumble shook the tunnel, and a section of wall slid inward to reveal a narrow stair carved into living rock. The floor tiles, etched with swirling gusts, gleamed freshly exposed. Caden stepped forward onto the descending steps, Ronan and Tav close behind. Mara followed, her emberflies dancing ahead like guiding spirits. The stairs spiraled down for what felt like an eternity, the temperature dropping until every breath created small clouds. Frost clung to the carved walls and the emberfly's glow turned a cold blue. When the spiral leveled out, they emerged into a circular chamber whose ceiling arched high above, encrusted with frost-rimmed stalactites like chandeliers of ice. At its center lay a shallow pool whose surface shimmered with starlight reflections, though no star could ever shine this far below ground. This must be the Heartwater Pool, Caden whispered. He recalled Mara's words, drink but share only what you can afford to lose. He knelt and cupped his hands to collect the icy water. Before he could lift it to his lips, Ronan's hawk screeched from his gauntlet. All heads snapped up as ripples spread across the pool's surface, congealing into a pale, translucent figure, a woman in flowing robes, her face half hidden by a hood, eyes like polished moonstone. Who disturbs my vigil? The apparition asked, voice echoing like wind through dead leaves. Caden exchanged glances with his companions. He swallowed and stepped forward. I am Caden Vale of Falcon's Crest, seeker of the Falcon's bounty grimoire. We seek one page, so we might learn to tame flight magic and restore balance to sky and earth. The spirit's gaze flicked to each of them in turn. Only those who prove themselves worthy may sip of the Heartwater. Speak true your burdens, and only then shall you receive what you seek. Tabe grunted, I don't fancy bearing my heart to a ghost, but here go. He sheathed his sword and spoke in a quiet voice. I carry the weight of lives I've taken for coin, souls who called me friend before I drew steel. His shoulders hunched. I wish to redeem the blood on my hands. The spirit inclined her head, then turned to Mara. And you, healer of embers, what pain do you bear? Mara traced a gentle finger through the pool's edge. I've seen children burn in plague's fires, and I could do nothing but nurse the dying. I carry the sorrow of lives I couldn't save. The emberflies flickered brighter, as if acknowledging her confession. Ronan spoke next. I hunted for sport until I saw the true cost in a mother's tears. I seek a purpose beyond the chase. The spirit's head bowed once more. Then come, stranger of the sky. Finally, the spirit regarded Caden. And you, seeker of forgotten flight, what do you risk for magic's whisper? Caden steadied his voice. I risk losing the very ground beneath me. I crave the freedom of flight, but I fear it may carry me beyond the bonds of kin and homeland I hold dear. The spirit's form wavered, then dissolved into motes of light that drifted above the pool. The water glowed, and a single page, its edges carved with wing-like glyphs, rose from the depths. Caden reached out and caught it, its chill sending ripples through his veins. He tucked it into a protective crystal scroll tube at his belt. Remember, the voice whispered as the motes retreated into darkness. Flight is not an escape from self, but a path to understanding your roots. As they climbed back up the spiraling corridor, hearts lightened by triumph and reflection, Caden felt the first tug of wind magic stirring in his fingertips. Outside, the dusk-willed mists parted to reveal a shattered moon. Its brilliance filtered through bramble-hung branches. Ronan, page 1 in hand, and not a single scratch on your pride. Mara exhaled, the emberflies returning to her basket. Our journey is only beginning, but we've earned our first victory. Tav laughed, strapping on his pack. Now let's hope the next guardian is less chatty and more likely to stay dead. Caden bowed his head in gratitude to the unseen spirit, then looked to the path ahead. The whispering fen awaits, and beyond it, ember-deep marsh. We map our route by moonlight, guided by this page, and by each other. For the first time, the weight of his motivation, knowledge of flight, freedom, mastery, felt balanced by something deeper. The fellowship of companions, each shaped by their own scars and hopes. He adjusted the spyglass in his hand. Onward then, to page 2, and the secrets of wind and sky that lie hidden in shadowed marshes. Together, they strode into the waning moonlight, leaving behind the silent watch of the Heartwater pool. Above them, unseen currents of magic stirred, as if the island itself had exhaled in approval. The Falcon's bounty was no longer a distant myth. It was a promise, alive and pulsing with adventure. And for Caden Vale, the cartographer turned grimoire seeker, the world had just begun to unfold its hidden wings. Moonlight sifted through the skeletal trees of the whispering fen, casting the marsh in an otherworldly glow. Caden led the small company down a tussock-strewn path, the twin glow of Mara's emberflies and Ronan's lantern bobbing like fireflies in the mist. Every footstep sank into damp peat, and thin reeds swayed as if murmuring ancient warnings. The air tasted faintly of brimstone and lilac, a reminder that this place held both beauty and danger in equal measure. Stay close, Caden whispered, voice taut with concentration. The moss here hides sinkholes that can swallow a man whole. He peered through his spyglass at the twisted silhouettes ahead. In the distance, gnarled black trunks rimmed a flooded clearing where the moon's reflection shimmered like a portal to another realm. Ronan trudged beside him, the kestrel perched on his shoulder. I can hear it, the hunter muttered, hand drifting to the fletching at his back. Something moving beneath the water. He tapped a finger against the haft of his shortbow, eyes narrowing. You think the next shard lies somewhere under that flooded basin? Caden nodded, lifting his cloak to avoid the damp. According to his Lesra's notes, the shard of Gale Heart lies hidden in a submerged grotto just beyond those dark willows. We'll need to cross the shallows, but gently so we don't trigger any wards. Mara hunched over the basket of emberflies, murmuring a soft incantation that coaxed warm light from their wings. They'll guide us, she said, her voice calm, despite the oppressive hush. But beware the reed spirits, they envy our light and will snatch it if they can. Chankive shadowed Caden's rear, the silver runes on his sword's pommel faintly aglow. I'll keep an eye out for reed spirits, he said in a low rumble. Last time I tangled with one, it tried to drown me in a tide of wet grass. At the water's edge, Caden paused and studied the mirror-like surface. We wade in single file, he instructed. Ronan, you first. Mara, then me. Tankive bring up the rear. The party advanced, boots slipping on algae-slick stones. The water rose to their knees, chilling their limbs, yet the emberflies and lantern bore them forward. As they reached mid-thigh depth, the water stilled unnaturally. The marsh reed stalks around them, bowed under unseen weight. Suddenly, 1,000 tiny hands of reed spirits burst upward, crackling like static against the lantern light. They coalesced into slender, faceless forms that hovered just above the water's surface. Their voices 1,000 faint rustlings. Your light, your warmth, yours. Mara's eyes widened. They're drawn to the emberflies, she whispered. If they seize them, we'll be blind in this maze. She held her hand aloft, chanting rapidly in the old tongue. flames flickered brighter as the emberflies pulsed in response, their golden glow dancing off the spirits and illuminating their wraith-like shapes. At her signal, Ronan loosed an arrow tipped with netting magic. It snapped through the air and caught a cluster of spirits, ensnaring them in glimmering mesh. The bound spirits wailed like wind through a torn sail before dissolving into motes of phosphorescence that drifted upward like dying stars. Tav sprang forward, sword humming as he carved an arc through the next wave of forms. Each slash left sparks of wild magic that crackled and sizzled. Caden gathered his focus and raised a hand, calling forth the whisper spell he had learned in the Sky Temple, a soft exhale of wind that scattered the remaining spirits to the reed's embrace. "Keep moving," he urged, voice firm. The air cleared suddenly, leaving only the gentle lapping of water against their legs and the distant cry of hunting hawks. Caden looked down at the murky depths and pointed, "There between those two willow trunks. I see carved steps leading underwater." They formed a tight line as Ronan found the steps by probing with his spear shaft. Each tread descended into the gloom, algae coating the stone like a treacherous carpet. Caden summoned a glow glyph on his palm, which beamed like a lantern to light their way. At the bottom, they arrived in a circular grotto, its walls inlaid with barnacled runes that pulsed faintly with sapphire light. "This is it," Caden breathed, running a glove-covered finger along the glyphs. The words say, "He who commands the wind must first be still within the storm." He turned to Tav. "You read benchward. What's the ritual?" Tav read aloud, voice echoing off the damp walls. "Place your hand upon the central plinth and speak your purpose. Only one whose heart is true may lift the Gale heart crystal from its basin." He paused. "Sounds straightforward enough. If your heart is, I don't know, true." Caden stepped forward with measured calm. He knelt at the basin's edge and gently brushed aside moss. There, resting on a carved pedestal half submerged in water, lay a crystalline shard, pale as storm-lit clouds, heart-shaped facets glinting. His palm hovered above it as he steadied his breath. "I seek the power to soar," he murmured, voice low and resolute, "not for glory or conquest, but to chart the world's wild currents and bring light to places where none has flown." The shard vibrated, sending ripples through the pool. Caden closed his fingers around it, and immediately a rush of wind magic surged through his arm. Cool, electrifying, like 1,000 breezes converging. The grotto thrummed with energy, and the runes on the walls blazed to life in a storm of luminescence. Caden winced as the power fought to coalesce. He channeled it with a steadying thought. For knowledge, for friends, for Falcon's crest. His heartbeat synchronized with the shard's pulse until the light within his palm burned steady. Outside, the turbulent wind from the fen funneled through the archway, howling like restless spirits freed. Mara and Ronan exchanged odd looks as Tiang caught Caden's burning gaze. "You've done it," he said quietly. "You've bound the Gale heart to your will." Caden rose, water dripping from his cloak and armor. The shard's glow dimmed to a soft, steady gleam, nestled in the pouch at his waist. "We have what we came for," he said, voice thick with emotion. "But this," he gestured at the ruined walls, "is only the beginning." They surfaced to find the forest transformed. Reeds bowed farther back, making a clear path, and the whispering trees seemed hushed, as if paying respect. The emberflies trailed behind them, their light flickering like embers in a dying fire. Ronan let out a hoarse laugh. "Falcon's crest will sing songs of this night." "You, Caden Vale, cartographer and stormmaster." Mara released a gentle smile. "I think the Ember Deep has earned itself a new legend." Tang clapped Caden on the shoulder. "Let's get back to the crest, before the next page calls our names." The party turned back toward the moss-laced steps, their reflections dancing in the rushing waters. As they climbed, Caden felt the shard in his pouch grow warm, as if eager to guide him onward. He paused, gazing back at the throne like pedestal in the grotto's heart. He whispered, "Thank you." Then, with renewed purpose, he led his companions out of the whispering fen, forging a path beneath ancient willows, and toward the Emberdeep marsh, each step carrying him closer to the next secret of the Falcon's bounty. They climbed the moss-slick stairway back into the whispering twilight of the forest, each step feeling lighter than the last. When Caden emerged beneath the twisted canopy, the reeds gave way to a boardwalk of ancient, waterlogged planks. He paused to steady himself, the Gale heart shard's warmth guiding his hand as he traced its smooth edge. "Emberdeep waits," he murmured. His companions gathered around, Ronan loosening the kestrel's hooded gaze, Mara securing her emberflies in their lantern, Tav cleaning his blade along his cloak. The boardwalk stretched into a horizon of dark water, and scattered islets crowned with charred reeds. Here the marsh breathed with slow, glowing breaths. Phosphorescent fungi clung to sunken logs, casting an eerie pale glow across the murky surface. Every ripple looked like a ghost stirring. Caden's heart raced. "Stay close," he warned. "The texts say Emberdeep's guardian lurks beneath these waters, and it's no spirit this time." Ronan grunted, drawing an arrow tipped with silver-tipped iron. "Let it surface. I'll show it why falcons rule the sky." Tav nodded, hefting his sword as though it were an extension of his arm. Mara Grid stabilized her ember lantern, its glow intensifying. "Remember," she said softly, "we sought this shard to master flight magic, but if Emberdeep's guardian sees any arrogance in us, it will test our humility." They advanced, boots sinking into the shallow water. Caden felt the swirling currents tug at his cloak's hem, almost as if the marsh itself struggled to keep him from pressing forward. A low, deep thrumming rippled through the air, like the heartbeat of a colossal creature. Through the gloom, a shape emerged, a gargantuan form of charred reeds and living ember root, its eyes twin coals glowing with molten light. It reared from the water with an earth-shaking groan, towering above them like a half-drowned colossus. Tav's sword hummed a warning as he stepped forward. "Stand back," he called. "Let me try a parry." He lunged, blade meeting the creature's rickety reed arm in a shower of sparks that sizzled into steam. The guardian swiped, sending Tav sprawling backward in a spray of water. Ronan loosed arrow after arrow, each clanging harmlessly off the ember root skin. Mara threw sulphurous vials that exploded in bursts of green flame, but the guardian's tendrils only shimmered as they absorbed the heat. Caden swallowed. The shard pulsed at his belt, like a trapped heartbeat begging release. Gathering his courage, he lifted his arms and whispered the incantation of windsong, his voice resonating with calm authority. "Winds that dance on tempest's edge, bend your will to my pledge. Carry me swift on feathered breath. Let grace outstrip the grasp of death." A sudden gale whipped through the marsh, swirling around the night in a vortex of wind and spray. His cloak snapped out like wings. The shards in his pouch flared, and he felt a tug toward the colossal guardian. With every ounce of resolve, Caden stepped forward, wind magic propelling him in a soaring leap. He skimmed above the water, wheeling closely around the guardian's ember root head. The massive creature roared, the sound echoing like thunder through the reeds. In midair, Caden reached to his belt and drew the shard of Gale Heart. The crystal hummed with perfect resonance. He thrust it toward the guardian's glowing eyes and channeled the shard's calm wind force inward. The gale stilled an instant of perfect silence, and the ember root colossus blinked in confusion, its molten eyes dimming to coals. Then, with a low rumble, the creature knelt, its towering frame crumbling piece by piece into harmless driftwood. Water sighed as the fragments settled, and the marsh exhaled a quiet relief. Caden floated down like a leaf on the breeze, landing softly in a shallow pool. His heart pounded with triumph and exhaustion. Mara hurried to his side, her eyes wide with awe. You truly spoke peace to a storm," she whispered. Helping him upright, Taba clapped him on the back, grinned grudgingly proud. "I'll eat my hat if I ever think your books made you a bore again." Ronan let loose a triumphant cry as he reclaimed his kestrel, which circled once overhead before perching on his gauntlet. That, the hunter declared, was a performance worthy of any sky courser. "You, Vale, have the wind at your command." Caden pressed the shard to his chest, its warmth a balm against lingering cold. "Thank you," he said quietly, looking out over the still waters now dotted with glowing fungal clusters. This page was more than just a lesson. It's the heart of flight itself. He tucked the shard safely away, but we've still miles to go before the grimoire is complete. Next stop, Emberdeep's sunken library beneath the Grey Hollows. They gathered their gear and pressed onward, the boardwalk giving way to damp marshland underfoot. As dawn broke, the marsh's gloom lifted into soft gold light. Caden inhaled, tasting the promise of discovery on the breeze. Behind them, the broken colossus lay in peaceful ruin. Ahead, the Grey Hollows beckoned, ancient sinkholes rumored to hide the next passage of the Falcon's bounty grimoire. With steadfast steps, they marched into the waking marsh, each determined to see the quest through, knowing that together they held the key to unlocking a magic older than the tides themselves. The boardwalk finally dissolved into quaking bog, forcing the party to pick their way across tussin knee-deep water. Every step was a careful negotiation. One false move could plunge a boot, and perhaps a life, into hidden mine. Caden's cloak trailed water, the Gale Heart shard secured close to his chest. He looked to Ronan, who tapped the ground with his spear. Soft spots ahead. "Follow my footsteps." The hunter's boots pressed into firmer ground, and everyone followed in careful line. Mara moved beside Caden, her lantern of ember flies casting a warm glow over the water's shivering surface. Legends say the Grey Hollows lie at the foot of the Widow's Spire, she murmured, eyes scanning the distant horizon. True to her words, a jagged silhouette rose beyond the marsh. A lone stone tower, its narrow windows like watchful eyes, perched atop a hill of dark peat and twisted roots. Tavia, ever the pragmatist, checked the spyglass. Less than 2 leagues, he announced. If we keep this pace, we'll be there by twilight, assuming nothing tries to drown us in the meantime. He sheathed his sword, and knowing this place, something well. As they trudged forward, the marshland's eerie serenity began to fracture. A low hum resonated through the reeds. A vibration like distant hammer strikes against bell metal. Caden gripped the shard, its core drifting in tune with the unfamiliar rhythm. He paused and closed his eyes, letting the pulse of the marsh seep into his sense. Beneath the undercurrent of humming water, he heard echoes, disembodied chanting that wove through the air like a morning hymn. Ronin's kestrel squawked from the hunter's gauntlet, its feathers ruffling in alarm. Sounds like many voices. He frowned. Better keep your wits about you. Mara halted at a cluster of black-rooted willows, whose trunks writhed like specters. The chanting grew louder, and as Caden stepped closer, glowing runes carved into the bark came alive. Runes that matched those in Islyra's notes for locating the Grey Hollow's hidden entrance. The lines pulsed in a loop, chanting in ancient syllables, "Here lies the path to knowledge lost, where wisdom sleeps 'neath silver frost. Speak the name of wind and rain, and enter through the hidden vein." Caden exhaled, assembling the phrase in his mind. He raised a hand and spoke, "Ailereth Ventus Kali." Instantly, the runes flared, and the willow's trunk split, revealing a narrow crevice beneath their twisted roots. Cold air gusted forth, carrying scents of frost and old parchment. "That must be it," Caden said, raising his voice so the others could hear. The hidden vein. They ducked through the gap in single file, finding themselves in a descending tunnel lined with frost-rimmed crystals that glowed with pale luminescence. The chanting from above faded, replaced by the distant drip of water echoing through the stone corridor. Caden's hand brushed against the cool crystals, and each touch sent a tingle of arcane energy through his fingers. "These crystals, they store memory magic," he whispered. "This must be the sunken library. The next page rests somewhere ahead." As they pressed deeper, the tunnel opened into a vast cavern, where the stone walls curved upward like the hull of an overturned ship. Piles of waterlogged tomes lay scattered among broken pillars. Faded murals depicted scholars and storm spirits in reverent communion. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and hidden knowledge. In the center stood a stone dais, upon which rested an ebony tome, bound with metallic vines that pulsed faintly in the shard's glow. Tav approached cautious, looks heavily warded. He tapped the vines with his knuckles. "Do your magic dance, Caden." Caden stepped forward, placing the Gale Heart shard onto the dais's carved wind glyph. The shard's light intertwined with the glyphs, drawing arcane runes from the walls into a swirling vortex above the tome. The metallic vines unraveled, slipping away like liquid mercury to reveal the book's cover, a simple symbol of a winged quill. Mara knelt beside the tome, reverently tracing the quill emblem. "This is the Chronicle of Aylmore," she breathed. "It contains the principles of wind-scribe magic." Caden opened the book, and ancient words shimmered onto crisp new pages as if eager to be read. He flipped to the first illuminated text. "To write in the sky, one must first learn the language of clouds. To command the storm, one must heed the whispers of the wind." He closed the tome and looked up at his companions. "I have what I came for." His voice rang with both triumph and humility. "But this book is more than a tool, it's a responsibility." Ronan sheathed his spear. "Then let's take it and go," he said, stepping back toward the tunnel's mouth. As they retraced their path, the library's crystal walls dimmed, and the willows sealed behind them with a whisper of wind. Emerging into the marsh's dimming light, they felt the weight of the chronicle against the Gale Heart shard, a perfect balance of knowledge and power. The journey back to Falcon's Crest would be long, but Caden knew he carried more than a book. He held the promise of flight made living, a gift to be shared with those who dared to dream of skies beyond reach. And as he guided his friends across the ember-deep road toward the next horizon, the world seemed poised on the brink of new dawn. One written not in ink alone, but in wind and wonder. Their journey out of Emberdeep's shadowed reaches carried them back through the dusk-wold forest under a waning moon. Caden guided the party along the reformed path of bones and reeds. Now that the sentinel of the hollow had fallen silent, the whisper spirits no longer stirred. The air felt lighter, warmer, as if the very magic of the chronicle had breathed new hope into the land. Ronan's kestrel soared overhead, its keen eyes scouting the canopy. Tav and Mara shared quiet conversation. their laughter drifting on the night breeze like drifting ember. As the first pale light of dawn broke through the treetops, they crested the ridge overlooking Falcon's Crest. The city's spires, carved of pale stone and crowned by wind-tossed banners, gleamed like a beacon of promise. Below, early rising merchants set out crates of sky pearls and feather thread garments onto barges bound for distant ports. Caden's heart swelled with pride and relief at the sight of his home. No longer a dusty memory but an anchor for all he'd achieved. They descended the hill and passed through the city's great gate, where the guard captain Sir Joranna Blackwind awaited them, stern and curious. "You've been gone longer than any courier," she said, her pale eyes narrowing as she studied Tav's rune-etched sword and Mara's ember lantern. "What treasure do you bring that calls the Sky Hunter, the Flame Weaver, and the Blade Singer back at first light?" Caden stepped forward, weaving a confident smile. "Not treasure, Captain, but knowledge. The Chronicle of Aylmore." He held up the ebony tome bound in living vines. Its winged quill emblem gleamed with promise. "Within these pages lies the next lesson of Falcon's bounty, the art of writing magic across the heavens." Joranna's jaw slackened in awe. A hush fell over the sentries and onlook. Then, as though released from a silent command, they stepped aside, forming a path to the archives of the Sky Temple, a domed building crowned with stained glass windows depicting storm spirits. At its great bronze door, as Lyra the Tome Keeper waited, draped in midnight blue robes that shimmered like starlight, her silver-rimmed spectacles glinted as she took in the sight of the book and the shard of Gale heart in Caden's hand. "You've done well," as Lyra said, voice both proud and relieved. She led them inside the vaulted hall where rows of living tomes floated in brass-rimmed alcoves. Each book hummed with its own magic. Closer to the dais, the chronicle pulsed softly as though eager to share its secret. Caden carefully placed the ebony volume on a marble lectern carved with wind glyphs. Lantern light danced off the vaulted ceiling, casting intricate shadows that seemed to swirl in accordance with the shard's faint glow. Kenton knelt beside the book. He opened to the page they had claimed in the grotto, reading aloud the shimmering text. As he spoke, the stained glass panes of the dome caught the morning sun, projecting prismatic shafts of light that danced across the marble floor. The elven scholar's voice, steady and sure, wove a bridge between spoken word and living magic, and the chronicle's runes lifted from the page, coalescing into a three-dimensional script that circled the hall in a living spiral. As Lyra's eyes glowed with delight, "The first shard has bonded you to the chronicle's rhythm. Now, to unlock the next page, you must learn the art of Cloud Scribe to capture the shape of vapor in writing." She paused, her gaze shifting to the shard. "But the lesson must be earned. But once learned, the sky itself will heed your call." Tam crossed his arms, leaning against the lectern. "We've done the hard part," he teased gently. "Now we just need to draw on the clouds." "Sounds easier than wording reed spirit." Mara offered a wry smile. "Let's hope so, unless the cloud spirits are just as fickle." Ronan nodded towards Caden. "You ready, cartographer? The skies await your quill." Caden rose, pocketing the shard's warmth against his side. The chamber of living tomes hushed in anticipation as he turned to face the vast stained glass dome overhead, where shifting clouds painted scenes of storm and stillness alike. Drawing a deep breath, he lifted his spyglass, focusing first on a single skyborn wisp drifting beyond the window's edge. Then, with ink-stained fingers dipped in moon water, he began to trace its outline on a scroll of cloud-wheat paper laid upon the marble lectern. The air trembled as the wisp's shape solidified in living ink, the spiral of the chronicle's magic unfurling around Caden's quill. Each careful stroke stitched wind patterns into the code of the sky. Light and shadow danced, and for a heartbeat the hall seemed to soar, cloud forms drifting within hallowed walls. Then, as the final flourish of his glyph took shape, a low rumble vibrated beneath their feet. A panel slid open at the base of the lectern, revealing the next gleaming page of the chronicle. Caden lifted it, awe and triumph coursing through him. "We have it," he whispered, holding it aloft for all to see. Page 2, Cloud Scribe achieved. Lyra clapped her hands, echoing like thunder. "Well done, Cadel Vale. Tomorrow we will test its power on Falcon's Crest's highest tower. But tonight, you all deserve rest and a feast in the Hall of Wind." As they filed out of the archives, Tamon in hand, shard secure, they felt the promise of what lay ahead. The chronicle was incomplete, its pages scattered across hidden corners of Vale and home. Yet with each lesson mastered, Caden's dream of mapping distant skies and sharing flight magic with his people grew ever closer. And as the sun rose over Falcon's Crest, painting the clouds in ribbons of gold, the Windsong Chronicle hummed with the first true notes of a sky reborn. That evening, the Hall of Winds blazed with torchlight and laughter. Long oak tables groaned under platters of spiced pheasant, sweet wine cooled with shards of glacier ice, and bowls of ember-roasted root vegetable. Banners bearing the crest of Falcon's crest and outstretched winged quill fluttered overhead in a warm draft. Caden settled between Ronan, who recounted the cherishing of his kestrel's return, and Mara, who quietly tended the emberflies in their glass lanterns, so they wouldn't be stolen by overzealous servants. Tab lounged at the head of the table, idly polishing the Chronicle's new page with a flourish of swagger. Selera rose from her place at a smaller, elevated dais. The room hushed as she tapped a silver goblet with her quill. "Friends," she began, "tonight we celebrate not only our success but the dawn of possibility. We have the first 2 pages of the Windsong Chronicle. With these, any scholar may learn to shape wind and cloud alike." She gestured to Kate. "But tomorrow young Vale will teach us what he has learned, and we will test cloud scribe magic on the Tower of Zephyrs, high above these walls." A cheer rose, echoing off vaulted stone. Caden felt a flush of pride as hands clapped him on the back. He stood, lifting his own goblet. "To friends whose courage carried me," he toasted, voice steady with emotion, "and to the sky, where dreams take wing." The hall emptied their cups in a single breath, wine sloshing over rims like spilled sunrise. After the feast, Caden slipped away onto a narrow balcony, overlooking the city. Below, rivers of lantern light wove between whitewashed homes and windmills, turning lazily in the evening breeze. He clutched the Chronicle's pages tightly, feeling the shard of Gale heart tucked beneath his cloak. "It was some speech." Ronan emerged, the kestrel perched on his shoulder. "Don't let it go to your head." Caden chuckled softly. "Wouldn't dream of it." He let the night air fill his lungs. "Tomorrow I teach. Then we seek the 3rd page in the Emberdeep Marsh's sunken archive." Mara joined them, her lantern's glow reflecting in her thoughtful eyes. "I've studied the page on Cloud Scribe. There's a reference to the Skyforge monolith in the ruins of Ulalmor, an ancient beacon once used to shape storms. It might guide us to the 3rd shard." Tab appeared at the balcony's archway, crossing his arms. "Stormforge, sunken vaults. Our feet barely touched dry land lately. What's so special about this monolith?" Caden met his gaze. "It was the forge's heart, a conduit for elemental channel. If we can reignite it, we could stand a chance against whatever wards guard the next page." Ronan whistled low. "Sounds dangerous. I'm in." He flexed his gauntleted hand. "I'll bring Hawkeyes and swift steel." Mara nodded. "I'll prepare stormproof poultices and maybe a charm or 2 to keep the emberflies alive underwater." Tab smirked. "Then it's settled. We head to Ulalmor at first light." As dawn crept across the sky, Caden felt both excitement and the weight of responsibility. The Chronicle was more than a collection of spells. It was a record of harmony between humankind and the elements. Each page they recovered would bring them closer to restoring that balance in Valenholm. He turned back toward the Hall of Winds, whereas Lyra was already addressing a small gathering of eager students. Tomorrow, the city would learn to draw clouds in script and shape breezes with intent. And beyond that, waiting in the sunken vaults of Emberdeep, lay the next secret of flight. With hope in his heart and wind at his back, Caden Val, cartographer, stormmaster and student of sky, closed his eyes briefly and listened to the gentle sigh of the morning breeze, knowing that every new gust carried the promise of discovery. Dawn's first light filtered through the stained glass windows of the Hall of Winds, as Caden stepped onto the raised dais before a gathered crowd of eager students, scholars and curious onlookers. Scrolls, quills and small crystals lined the lectern in front of him. The air buzzed with excitement. Today would mark the first public demonstration of Cloud Scribe magic in Falcon's Crest. He cleared his throat, feeling the shard of Gale heart warm against his side. "Good morning," he called, voice steady. "By request of the Sky Temple's Council and the Falcon's Crest Assembly, today I will teach the basic principles of Cloud Scribe. Follow along with your quills and special ink. Remember, flight magic requires both knowledge and respect for the sky's balance." As Lyra moved through the audience, distributing strips of parchment specially treated with moonwater glaze, Mara handed out small vials of luminous ink. Tabe leaned against a marble column, arms folded, watching the proceedings with amused interest. Ronan's kestrel perched on a high beam, ready to signal missteps with a sharp cry. Caden lifted his pen and dipped it into the ink. "First," he began, "observe the sky this morning. Note the shape, density, and flow of the cloud. To write in the sky, you must first learn to see it as language." He held up a parchment on which he had sketched 3 simple cirrus formations, delicate lines drifting in tandem. These wisps speak of calm air currents. Now, with your quills, replicate their outline. He paused to let the students trace the shapes. Soft scratches of quills on parchment filled the hall. Caden walked among the rows, offering gentle corrections. Your lines here, he said, to a young page, are too heavy. The quill must glide as a breeze, light and unbroken. The page nodded, adjusting the quill with newfound care. Once most had mastered the basic cloud glyphs, Caden announced, next, we imbue them with wind essence. He placed his hand over the glyph and whispered, Auster Flavus, then to say quo. At his words, the glyph shimmered on the parchment, then lifted into the air as a small drifting puff of cloud. Gasps filled the hall, as the ephemeral cloudlet held its shape for a heartbeat, then evaporated in a gentle mist. That is Cloud Scribe in its simplest form, Caden explained. With practice, one writes clouds that guide wind currents, carry messages, or even cradle a feathered craft. Applause thundered through the hall. Lyra's eyes shone with pride. Tav clapped him on the shoulder. Not bad for a bookworm, Tav teased, earning a grin from Caden. Mara whispered, you've given them hope, and proof that magic can be shared. Caden nodded, absorbing the weight of her words. After dismissing the students to practice under supervised instruction, he gathered his companions by the lectern. Everything's ready, he asked. Ronan hefted his pack. Aye, maps, provisions, and my kestrel's falconry gear. Mara slung her satchel over her shoulder, emberflies glowing within. I've prepared antidotes for marsh fumes and sea lichen stings. Tav snapped open a long case to reveal several roamed weapons, arms polished and wards attuned. Lyra joined them, holding a rolled map of Valenholm. We leave within the hour. The path to the ruins of Almor runs first through the starlit vale, then the ashen badlands, before reaching the grey hollows. She pointed on the map as she spoke. Be wary. The vale's night-blooming orchids can induce vivid hallucinations, and the badlands' ashes are said to conceal fire wraiths. She folded the map, but if you press on, the sunken library lies beneath the monolith of the Stormforge where the next page awaits. Caden slung his pack over his shoulder, the newly acquired chronicle pages and Gale heart shard secure within. Then let us not tarry. He led the way down the temple's marble steps into the morning sun. Outside, carriage horses and pack llamas waited by the rear gate. Caden climbed into the driver's seat of his own wagon, a sturdy cart retrofitted with a collapsible mast and small sail for wind travel across open plains, when possible. Ronan loaded his hawk's dome cage on the front bench. Mara stowed her wooden lantern box in the back, followed by Tav's weapons crate. Lyra climbed aboard last, clutching her own satchel of scrolls. Northward to Starlit Vale, Caden announced, snapping the reins. The wagon jolted forward, wheels creaking over cobblestone street. Tav settled beside him. So, cartographer, reckon we'll dodge ghosts and wraiths this time? He asked dryly. Caden smiled. If legends hold true, we'll face more than just restless spirits. But together, I have no doubt we'll succeed. He nudged the horses, and the wagon rumbled through the gate into the rising sun. The road to Starlit Vale wound through rolling farmland, dotted with glass greenhouses of alchemists, experimenting with sunlight blooms. Fields of golden wheat swayed in gentle breezes, and small villages lined the furrows. In one such hamlet, Wollograd, they paused for midday rest. Tab bartered with local smiths for fresh horseshoes, while Mara traded emberflies for healing herbs. Ronan charmed children with his falcon's aerial displays, and Lyra consulted villagers about local legends of the starlight orchards. Caden stretched as they packed up. He sketched notes in a small journal. The tower at the valley's entrance, the deep violet hue of the orchard's blooms, and villagers' warnings of midnight whispers. Each jotting fueled his anticipation for the Vale's mysteries. By late afternoon, the wagon climbed into the foothills, where trees arched overhead, leaves glowing pale silver even in daylight. A soft hush fell as the borders of the Vale claimed them. The orchard opened before them, in a sea of luminous blossoms under a sky already warming to sunset. Caden's heart caught at the sight. Petals drifting downward like snowflakes, each shimmered with an inner light. They set camp at the orchard's edge. Tab and Ronan built a small fire. Mara gathered petals for her poultices. Lyra unrolled her map. Caden lingered at the boundary of the orchard, eyes tracing the blossoms vibrating in the twilight wind. A low, lilting hum rose from the orchard depths. Caden felt the pulsing of ancient magic, and something deeper. A call that tugged at his soul. He turned to his friend. Tomorrow, we cross into these orchards under moonlight. Stay close, for I suspect the next clue lies not in stone, but in the heart of these living blooms. That night, beneath a canopy of woven petals and starlight, Caden dreamed of flight, carrying the Chronicle's pages toward an endless sky, his companions beside him, and Falcon's crest shining far below. and as the first star winked in the dark expanse overhead, he awoke with a new certainty. The path of the Falcon's bounty was a journey of wind and wonder, and together they would chart it to its end. That night, as the embers in the campfire guttered low, Caden stood at the edge of the starlit orchard. Silver blossoms drifted down in slow spirals, carpeting the ground in soft luminescence. The air thrummed with quiet magic, a lullaby of wind and petal. His companions slept clustered around the dying embers. Tata's blade resting on his chest, Ronan's kestrel tucked under its hood, Mara cradling her lantern of glowing insects, and Islira poring over maps by torchlight. Caden closed his eyes, letting the orchard's chorus wash over him. The hush of petals, the faint sigh of wind through silver leaves. He thought of the Chronicle's pages tucked against his heart, the gleam of the Gale Heart shard at his belt. All that knowledge he'd earned, Cloud Scribe and Sky Forge had taught him that magic was as much about listening as it was about speaking, and tonight, he needed to listen. He stepped forward, boots silent on moon-cooled petals. The orchard seemed to shift around him, paths parting between rows of luminous trees. Each footfall sent a ripple through the phosphorescent ground cover, revealing veins of pale blue light beneath. He followed those veins deeper, guided by an intuition that thrummed in his veins in perfect sync with the shard's pulse. Halfway through the orchard, he paused at a clearing where dozens of white-barked trees formed a concentric ring. In their midst rose a single stump, its surface carved with concentric runes that matched none he had seen before. The stump glowed faintly, as if breath rose from old wood. Caden knelt, tracing the runes with careful finger. They spelled out a single phrase: "To find the heart that blooms in night, speak the name of moon-born light." He closed his eyes and whispered, "Lunaris Argentum." At once the stump's glow intensified, and the petals around him stiffened in place, suspended in midair. A hush fell so complete it pressed against his eardrums. Then, from the stump's center a tiny bud unfurled, a single blossom brighter than any other in the orchard. Caden's breath caught as he reached out to pluck it. The moment his fingers closed around the stem, a lighthouse bright flash erupted, illuminating the entire grove. He staggered back as the blossom's glow coalesced into a slender scroll of moonlit parchment, floating downward into his hands. The scent of night-blooming jasmine filled his sense. Unfurling the scroll, he read the shimmering text. Wave Scribe's page, to write the sea's song upon the sands, you must walk the shore at dawn's first glance. Caden's heart raced. The next lesson Wave Scribe awaited not in forest or ruins, but where sea met land. He tucked the scroll into the Chronicle's binding, and turned back toward camp. The orb of silver blossom cradled gently in his palm. At the campsite, his friends stirred as the moonlit glow reached them. Tiev sat up, rubbing his eyes. "What did you break this time?" he grunted. Caden grinned, bending to place the blossom and scroll on the stone beside the Chronicle. "Nothing broken, only unlocked." He showed them the page. Wave Scribe, the magic to shape water's flow and record its song. Mara's emberflies drifted closer, their glow flickering in recognition. "We've come a long way since that dusty study," she said softly, voice brimming with pride. Ronan stretched and swung his kestrel gently. Next stop, the golden shore. He glanced at the horizon, where moonlit waves lapped unseen. "I've got maps that'll guide us if we don't drown first." Islira stood, rolling the maps in the Chronicle carefully. "At dawn, we follow the river west to the Sea of Silver, then south along its sands. There in a hidden inlet lies the Sea Echo Cave where the final verse awaits." Tiev sheathed his sword with a snap. "Sea caves and singing scrolls can't wait." He grinned. "Just hope we don't anger any mer witches on the way." Caden laughed, the sound echoing through the trees. "Regardless, we face it together." He inhaled the cool dawn air, petals drifting gently around him as though in benediction. The Chronicle rested as their shared purpose twice reforged through wind and water. When the first pale light of dawn crested the orchard's rim, they broke camp and set out, the world ahead painting itself in shades of rose and pearl. Behind them, the starlit orchard lay silent, its moon blossoms folding at last into slumber. Before them, the winding trail to the Sea of Silver beckoned, another step on a journey of magic, friendship, and the promise of songs yet unwritten upon earth and tide. And so, with hearts steady and spirits alight, Caden Vale and his companions marched into the awakening world, ready to claim the Wave Scribe page and bring the Falcon's bounty ever closer to its final revelation. By first light, the party tracked the winding course of the Silverthorn River as it slipped through misty molasses gold marshes toward the Sea of Silver. Dew-heavy reeds bowed under Caden's feet, while Ronan's kestrel wheeled above, its keen eye scouting the far bank. Mara trod quietly beside him, her lantern of emberflies tucked away for daylight travel but still glowing faintly in her satchel. Tab brought up the rear, his armored boots striking the wet ground with a steady rhythm. Each carried the weight of the Chronicle's pages and a shared anticipation. The Wave Scribe page lay just beyond the river's mouth, hidden in a sea cave sculpted by tide and time. They passed through Sunfall Dushy's verdant fields, where water wheels ground barley into flour and laughter drifted from waking farmsteads. Villagers paused in their chores to greet Ronan's hawk or marvel at Mara's caged fireflies, offering fresh bread and salted fish in exchange for tales of floating libraries and whispering orchards. At midday, they camped beneath the soaring pylons of an old bridge, its moss-clad arches rising like silent sentinels above the foaming current. Over bowls of herb stew, Caden unrolled the wave-scribed scroll once more. Write the song the sea itself would sing, by dawn's first light on shifting wing. Isli retraced the lines with a slender finger. The cave's mouth faces east, she noted, so we must reach the Sea of Silver by tomorrow's dawn. The tide there shifts quickly, low tide will grant us entrance, but misjudge it and the inlet will vanish beneath a wall of water. Tam leaned forward, voice low. Then we push on at first moonlight. I'll scout the dunes at dusk, find the inlet's hidden tongue. He slammed a gauntleted fist against the stew pot in mock seriousness. No excuse for missing a tide. At dusk, they struck camp near a grove of salt-scarred oaks where the river widened into a brackish lagoon. As the sun sank, Caden and Tab rode ahead on spare horses, Mara and Ronan waiting beside the cart to keep an eye on the emberflies batch stored in waterproof pod. The air turned briny, and the first sea breezes carried glints of surf crashing over distant reefs. When the dunes rose before them, patterned by wind into crinkled waves of sand, Tam dismounted and listened. Moments later, he pointed to a sliver of broken cliff half hidden by kelp mat. There, he whispered, a narrow slit in the rock, just wide enough to slip through at low tide. We'll need to time our entry to the ebb. Caden's heart thrummed as they rounded the dune crest. Below lay the inlet, a crescent of silver sand bordered by sheer cliffs. Waves lapped at the shore in gentle arcs, their white foam glimmering under the moon's pale gaze. He felt the shard of Gale heart warm once more as though eager to guide him into the cavern's hush. They set camp on the sand, mapping the inlet's exact contours on a scrap of parchment. Mara stoked a small driftwood fire and prepared her poultices, should they be cut or scraped on barnacled stones. Ronan climbed a driftwood watchtower he fashioned from logs, his hawk scanning the horizon for shifting tides. Slider murmured last rites from the memory sanctum, incantations to bless their footsteps beneath the waves. Cave paced the sand, sword in hand, sharpening his blade against a wet stone. At dawn's first blush, Caden woke to the sound of water gurgling far below the rock face. He scrambled to the edge of the inlet. The tide had retreated, revealing a narrow archway carved by centuries of salt and surge. The party gathered quickly, hearts pounding. Caden took a deep breath and stepped forward, the soft sand yielding beneath his boots. Ronan and Tav flanked him, weapons at the ready. Mary carried her lantern pods. Islyra clutched the Chronicle's 2 pages to her chest. They entered the arch, damp cliffs arching overhead like a cathedral. The scent of brine and ancient algae filled their lungs. Caden held the wavering glow glyph on his palm, weaving the incantation he had inscribed on the scroll. See scribe's call, hear my plea, reveal the path beneath the sea. The glyph's light pulsed against the cavern walls, and columns of water shimmering with bioluminescent plankton parted, creating a shimmering corridor beneath the waves. The inlet waters stilled to glass, and the tide churned currents, hushed as though listening. Guided by the glowing glyph, they waded through knee-deep water along the hidden passage, each step revealing carvings of mer spirits and drowned libraries etched into basalt walls. At the corridor's end, the water fell alley into a vast grotto. Pillars of coral and seismic fractures formed natural shelves, upon which rested a single tome, the 3rd page of the Windsong Chronicle, bound in kelp-woven sinew and glowing with an inner tide. Caden approached reverently, wading forward until the water reached his waist. He plucked the sea-scribed scroll from his coat, placing it next to the Chronicle's page. With a whispered phrase, words of wave and whispering reef, carve me truth beyond belief. The Chronicle's 3rd page unfurled a swirl of water glyphs that rose like living currents, wrapping around Caden's wrist in cool azure bands. The tide glyphs dissolved into his skin in a soft fizz, granting him the power to shape sea song. The cavern walls shivered as if in applause, and a lone seal's distant bark echoed through the chamber. Drenched and triumphant, Caden swam back to shore, the 3rd page clutched in his hand. His friends emerged behind him, faces alight with wonder and relief. Mara's emberflies bobbed in waterproof pods, their glow mirrored in the crystalline pool. Tiab and Rinning clapped Caden on the back, the salt water dripping from their smile, as they retraced their steps to Falcon's crest under a sky streaked with dawn's gold. Caden held all 3 pages of the Chronicle close, and every step felt lighter, buoyed by the promise that the next secret lay just beyond the horizon. The Falcon's bounty was drawing near its end, yet for the first time he felt whole bound by wind, cloud and sea. and carried by friendship into the final chapter of his quest. The road home meandered through the low hills of Sunfall Duchy, each mile bringing a new sunrise that danced across the 3 chronicle pages tucked safely in Caden's satchel. Tiev rode point, sword sheathed but ever ready, humming a soft tune that echoed against the rolling field. Behind him, Renan guided his kestrel in wide circles, the bird's keen eyes scouting for any sign of danger. Merrin and Syra walked side by side, Mara humming lullabies to her emberflies, while Azira inked fresh notes into her map, detailing every glyph and grotto they'd encounter. As they crested the final hill before Falcon's crest, the spires and windmills came into view like a mirage of alabaster against the morning sky. Caden felt his chest tighten with pride and relief. He had left as a humble cartographer, with dreams of flight. He would return as the Stormcaller's scion, master not only of wind and cloud, but of sea song as well. He adjusted the strap of his pack, pressing a reassuring hand against the Gale Heart shard hidden within. A cluster of townsfolk had gathered by the city's outer gate, a nervous throng of farmers, traders, and children. They erupted into cheers when they saw Renan's kestrel wheeling overhead, and Mara's emberflies bubbling to the surface of the hastily opened gate. Children rushed forward to greet the party, and even the stern captain of the guard allowed herself a rare smile as they filed through. Inside the Hall of Winds, the vaulted chamber was already arranged for a midday demonstration. Sturdy benches ringed a circular dais upon which floated a great globe of cloud-wheat paper. Above it hovered 3 swirling glyphs of wind, cloud, and tide, their pulsing lights casting shifting patterns across the marble walls. At the wall niches, living tomes drifted in silent vigil, their pages rustling as if greeting old friends. As Lyra rose to welcome the gathered crowd, artisans, scholars, and even the city's young apprentices pressed close to the dais. Citizens of Falcon's Crest, she called, voice like silver bells. Today we witness the union of sky, wind, and sea in the Windsong Chronicle. With the first 3 pages now in our care, Caden Vale will demonstrate the arts that bind our world's magic. A hush settled. Caden stepped forward, feeling the shard's warmth guide his veins. He placed the Gale Heart shard into a carved recess at the dais's edge. Next he laid the Cloud Scribe page flat upon the globe. Whispering the incantation of cirrus shapes, he traced each rune with his finger. The glyphs lifted and drifted outward, weaving into a miniature cloud formation that drifted above the crowd's heads before dissipating into gentle mist. Gasps and applause followed, but Caden raised a hand for silence. He reached for the Wave Scribe page and his voice steady intoned the script of tidal curves. Beneath his hand the globe's surface rippled as though water had been poured over it. Tiny waves sloshed within the glass sphere, lapping at its inner edges before settling into calm curl pattern. Finally, with solemn grace, Caden produced the page of Skyforge lore. He held aloft the kelp-bound scroll and called the words of elemental forging. The 3 glyphs, wind, cloud, and wave, whirled together into a blazing spiral of light. As the crowd leaned forward, Caden extended the light in a single beam toward the hall's stained glass lanterns. The panes flared with living color, each segment ringing like a wind harp before settling into a symphony of gentle chimes that reverberated through every heart. Silence reigned for a heartbeat. Then the hall erupted. Children cheered, scholars whispered in excited tones, and even the dour captain of the guard nodded with approval. Caden felt his pulse slow as the shard's glow dimmed to a soft ember at his side. He bowed deep. With these pages, he said, voice full of humility, we do not command the elements, but learn to listen to their song. Let our knowledge be a bridge between sky and sea and a gift to every soul who walks beneath their wonders. That afternoon, the Hall of Winds transformed into a temporary academy. Apprentices lined up to practice Cloud Scribe on sky paper, while elven wind singers tested the Chronicle's pages for new melodies. Mara guided a small circle of healers in charting sea song for healing waters, and Tau became an impromptu instructor in rune warding, demonstrating how wind glyphs might reinforce armor against gale blasts. Outside, beyond the city walls, the dawn's wind carried soft petitions of gratitude. Fishermen on the harbor reported smooth currents and whisper light breezes, promising their boats a prosperous season. The city's windmills turned faster than ever, their sails tuned to Cloud Scribe glyphs sketched on their blades by grateful children. As the sun dipped low, Caden stood atop the Tower of Zephyrs with Runan's kestrel on his arm. Below, the city lay bathed in golden light, a living tapestry woven of wind and salt and laughter. Caden closed his eyes and whispered a silent vow. Tomorrow Emberdeep's sunken archives will yield the final page. And then, he paused, feeling the shard pulse gently. Then the Chronicle's song will be complete. He opened his eyes to the horizon, where sea met sky, the last threads of daylight unraveling into twilight. The winds whispered their approval, and mariners on distant waves thought they heard a faint echo of a new melody carried on the breeze. With one last look at his home, Caden turned and descended the tower steps, Ronan and Mara at his side, Tauv keeping pace behind. The final chapter of their journey awaited one last hidden page, one last secret to unearth beneath the tides of Emberdeep Marsh, and as the city's lanterns flickered to life, the Falcon's bounty stood ready to fulfill its promise at the end of the world's breath. The road from Falcon's Crest to Emberdeep Marsh ran through fields of quick-growing reeds that bowed beneath every footstep, the ground softening into peat-black mud before giving way to knee-deep water. Caden Vale, cloak drawn tight against the rising chill of late afternoon, led his companions in single file. Each step was deliberate, every reed tussock tested with a probing toe before bearing weight. Behind him, Ronan's kestrel circled overhead, riding thermals that rose from the warm marsh waters. Mara followed, her lantern pods secured in watertight pouches, emberflies resting in glass vials that glowed softly against the gathering gloom. Tauv brought up the rear, sword drawn, watching for ambush. The sky overhead was awash of steel and pearl as the sun dipped toward the horizon. Caden consulted his compass, an instrument of carved bone and gentian root, its needle quivering toward the west. The chamber of depths lies beneath that shelf of rock, he called softly, pointing through the reeds where the marsh water widened into a dark basin. We must skirt the water's edge and find the submerged entry. They skirted the rim of the black basin, reeds clicking like ghostly fingers against the horses of the river that ran beneath the marsh. A distant croak echoed, the herald of marsh lurkers rising from hidden burrows. Caden halted, hand raised. "Stay calm," he whispered. "They're curious, but unthreatening if we don't provoke them." A clutch of amphibious creatures, smooth-skinned, bulbous-eyed marsh lurkers, paddled toward them, webs rippling with each stroke. Ronan unslung his short bow but lowered it without stepping forward. The beasts bobbed at the water's edge, nostrils flaring, then retreated as if deciding the party posed no prey. Mara released a single emberfly, its warmth drawing them back into the reeds like moths to a lantern, and they melted from view. At last they came to the rock shelf. A jutting precipice, stained dark and slick with algae. A jagged crevice yawned at its base, half submerged in the basin's murky water. Caden tested the current with a long staff. The water flowed inward, swallowing reeds and swirling eddies. "This is it," he said. "The chamber's entrance. When the tide's low, we slip in." Caden glanced at Ronan, who nodded once. Tave waded forward to hold a coil of rope at the ready. Mara knelt to chant a low, wind-soft incantation. Her emberflies glowing brighter in support. Islydra opened her satchel and withdrew a small glass sphere filled with distilled moonwater. She popped its seal and a gentle mist rose around the crevice, warding the tunnel from sudden currents. "Now," she whispered. One by one they slipped beneath the stone arch. The water closed over Caden's head with a soft rush, then settled to a steady hum as he exhaled and opened his flooded eyes to the dim bioluminescent glow of an underwater passage. Giant kelp fronds swayed in unseen currents, and tiny phosphorescent fish darted between columns of carved basalt. Caden reached toward a faint glow in the distance, runic lines shimmering like living veins in the rock. Guided by the shard's warmth, he led the way through the waterlogged corridor, each stroke drawing him closer to the chamber's heart. The passage widened into a vaulted cavern lit by braziers of oil-soaked runestone that flickered in underwater pockets of air, a marvel of ancient engineering. Submerged stairways led down to a shining dais at the center of the chamber, upon which lay the final page of the Windsong Chronicle, a waterlogged vellum, bound in rivulets of living tide glyphs. Caden's hand shook as he reached for the page, fingertips brushing the slick surface. The tide glyphs writhed in response, lacing into a pattern of spiraling waves. He closed his eyes and whispered the last verse he'd practiced alone long before they ever set out. "By moonlit tide and tempest call, the song of sea to sky enthrall. Grant me truth within this sign. Unite wind, wave, and cloud divine." The glyphs flared in a burst of cerulean light, and the crystal tide page rose from the dais in a ribbon of glowing water. Caden caught it, heart pounding, then secured it within a waterproof scroll tube. The moment the page was claimed, the braziers flickered back to darkness, and the kelp-lit runes pulsed one last time before fading to stillness. He signaled his companions, and they gathered at the water's edge. Mara exhaled in wonder, watching the page's ebb and flow glow from its tube. Tave grinned, dripping water from his armor. "We've done it, Vale. 3 pages. 1 left, if my count's right." As Lyra placed a hand on Caden's shoulder, "To the hidden vault where the final verse awaits, and then the chronicle will be complete." They swam back through the silent corridors, breath cautious as mariners navigating starless seas, and emerged at the crevice just as the moon dipped below the horizon. The tide had begun to return, but as Lyra's Moonwater ward held it at bay long enough for them to climb onto the rock shelf, Caden hauled himself up, dripping and triumphant, and tossed down a rope to help his friends. Once safely on dry ground, they paused at the marsh's edge to catch their breath. Dawn's hush settled over Ember Deep as if honoring their Caden unrolled the chronicle in the soft pre-dawn light, revealing 4 pages bound in sacred sequences of wind, cloud, wave and now tide. Each page glowed with its own elemental hue, silver, pearl, azure and deep sea blue. The 5th page, the final verse, was said to lie within the old shrine atop the Widow's Spire, where the marsh met sky in an ancient confluence of elemental power. Caden's palm pressed against the Galeheart shard at his belt, feeling its warmth pulse in time with his own heartbeat. He had come farther than any cartographer, transcending dusty maps to chart a path through wind and water. Now, only one secret remained. James shook off marsh water and clapped Caden on the back. Then to Widow's Spire, he declared, where we finish what we started, and finally earn the title. Stormcaller Scion. Mara packed away her emberflies, eyes bright with excitement. I'll have just enough lantern light to guide you up the spire's cliff face. Runan whistled softly, raising his kestrel. And I'll watch the skies for storm turns. Let's see what they make of our journey. As Lyra folded the chronicle carefully. Falcon's crest awaits the final page. Let us complete the chronicle and with it our promise to the winds and waves. As the first rays of sunlight painted the marsh's surface in rose and gold, Caden led his companions northward toward the jagged silhouette of the Widow's Spire looping skyward against the dawn. The marsh's hush was broken only by their footsteps and the far-off cry of gulls, as if nature itself called them onward to their destiny. And Caden Vale, cartographer, stormmaster and seeker of the Falcon's bounty, pressed on, ready at last to weave wind, cloud, wave and tide into the final song of the Windsong Chronicle. At the foot of the Widow's Spire, a lone stone tower spiraling into mist, Caden paused to catch his breath. Dawn's first glow brushed the marsh in rose tones, illuminating the narrow path carved into sheer shale. With Runan's kestrel soaring overhead and Mara's emberflies casting a gentle light, Caden led the climb. Each foothold was slick with moss, each handhold worn by centuries of wind. Tav and Lyra flanked him, weapons and tomes at the ready. Halfway up, a sudden gust whipped around them, snapping Mara's lantern from her grasp. Caden caught it with a stretch of wind magic before it plunged into the chasm below. He exchanged a grin with Tav. Storm's welcome committee, he said, voice steady against the howl. At the summit they found a circular dais ringed with carved runestones, 4 already glowing with the chronicle's colors. In the center, a shallow basin carved into the bedrock awaited the 5th page. Caden drew the final scroll from his pack, bound in braided reeds and etched with a single rune. Isinkiberant. He placed it in the basin and whispered the last incantation. Elemental chorus, join as one, let sky, cloud, wave and tide be spun. The basin overflowed in a burst of prismatic light. The 4 colors converged into a swirling vortex above the dais, coalescing into a living page that fluttered into Caden's outstretched hand. As the last glyphs settled onto crisp parchment, the runestones flared together in a final crescendo of light, and then still. Below them, the Martian sea and sky stretched unbroken to the horizon, unified in a hushed, perfect harmony. The winds stilled, the tide paused and clouds hung motionless in the dawn. For a long moment, Caden felt the world breathe as one. He turned to his friends, eyes shiny. It's complete, he said softly. The Windsong Chronicle whole at last. Beside him, Mara wept with joy. Tav sheathed his sword in reverence. Ronan bowed his head in respect. Lyra smiled through tears of triumph. Caden leaned on the carved dais, feeling the shard of Galeheart pulse gently against his chest. We set out to map the unseen, to tame the sky's secret songs, he whispered. Now the song is ours to share. He raised the completed chronicle page high. Let Falcon's crest and all who wander these lands remember that magic is not a force to command, but a song to join. With that the vortex of light dissipated, and the tower fell silent. Together they descended the spire, carrying the final page to the Hall of Wind. There, beneath the vaulted dome and the grateful eyes of their city, Caden Vale placed the Windsong Chronicle upon the sacred lectern. The assembled crowd fell silent, then erupted into joyous acclaim. As the pages gleamed in unison, weaving wind, cloud, wave and tide into an eternal melody, Caden looked out at Falcon's crest, his home made new by the journey. And, in the hush that followed the celebration, he heard the softest whisper on the breeze, a promise that in every gust of wind, every rolling cloud and every crashing wave, the song of the chronicle would forever carry the hope and wonder they had dared to seek. Thus ended the tale of Caden Fail, the Stormcaller's scion and the mastery of the Falcon's bounty that bound the elements in harmony for all time.